All right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. Got some policy changes to talk about. A lot of things are shifting around. This is something I did a lot of podcasts last week, and something I was kind of talking about, which is a lot of things are going to be in flux. Amazon seems to be kind of finding their new foothold, right? Trying to figure out what makes sense here. So, the product title change, that doesn't really affect resellers as much. It definitely affects, if you're doing wholesale where you really want to be in the nitty gritty, making changes to products, listing optimization kind of stuff, and obviously brands, that definitely impacts you. I think it's going to clean up the marketplace quite a bit. Just they're going to be way more strict on how you can do titles. And I think that's great. Because sometimes you look at them and you're like, what in the world even is this? And how, like, it might help for discoverability from an SEO perspective, but it really doesn't help with like conversion, in my opinion. But one that affects everyone is this reimbursement policy change. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to walk through what this means, because it's actually pretty impactful. So let me share this with everyone here. Okay, so this is the change we're talking about. So the FBA reimbursement policy change, it goes into effect on March 10th. And basically what is occurring here is they are shifting from reimbursing you the retail price of your products down to the manufacturing purchase price, which is a big deal, right? Now, the issue with that is kind of twofold, but for more clarity, they will still give you the retail price on the reimbursement once it's shipped to a customer. So that will not change. It's only when you're shipping in and when it's at a fulfillment center. Now, this is crazy. The estimation is already losing up to, or being reduced by about 70%. Now, most sellers are not doing their own reimbursement. They are using reimbursement services that are charging, roughly 10% basically of whatever they recover. Now, the interesting part about how reimbursement services work is you cannot automate it. Yeah, there's some internal automation stuff you can do, but you can't use, it's basically against TOS to use things like AI that could just basically pull everything in, do it for you, and submit it back. It's an army of humans, typically VAs, that are doing this work. So the margins aren't crazy, right? You still have human labor, but if these go down dramatically, this is going to impact reimbursement services like crazy. And the second part is one of two things will happen. Either Amazon will basically estimate the manufacturing price based on similar products in similar categories, or you give it to them. So there's this interesting transparency problem, right? Where you're basically telling Amazon your costs, which is interesting because you've never included your costs in Seller Central. It's just not a concept. That is starting to change potentially. So they're getting a lot more insights into your margins, what you're paying for. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I think it's like any tool. It could be used for good or for bad. If Amazon sees that the margins are much healthier than they anticipated, that could lead to a fee increase. If they see that it's, much tighter and they want a healthier marketplace, they could, keep with this pause kind of a thing or possibly decrease. So it really depends on how it's going to play out. But this is going to hit a lot of sellers. You are no longer getting that retail price for your reimbursements. You're as of March 10th, once we get to that point, you're actually getting the manufacturer cost. This is shaking up our world quite a lot from what I'm seeing online. A lot of people are really up in arms about it. And it kind of comes off of the, hey, we're not going to raise fees in 2025. Sounds great. And then something like this comes out and we're like, okay, you kind of took from one hand and gave it to the other.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, it's essentially a fee structure in disguise, if you will, a way for them to keep more money that would in the old way, I guess, back in your pocket. Now it's just staying in their pocket.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, like we kind of discussed in the last two office hours, it will be a very roller coaster year between Amazon and Walmart. Obviously, this doesn't directly impact anybody on Walmart there, but Amazon's going to start to shift and make adjustments. Obviously, them not implementing fees was a way for them to initially perhaps prevent folks from diversifying their profiles into Walmart. But then them implementing this, kind of going against that immediately. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we do have to play by their rules on their playground at times, and this is going to fall into that category. But yeah, I mean, it's just going to emphasize the need to just be more detail oriented, more focused on the nitty gritty details. Unfortunately, that's not always the sexiest part of running an Amazon business. But yeah, I think being in the weeds here will be very important, just to know how this is going to impact you, perhaps what new margins will look like. It's interesting for them to implement this right at the end of this month, following what would have been the typical surge in returns and potential reimbursements after Q4. So obviously this will affect folks moving forward, but the biggest impact would be probably a year from now, when you're kind of just wrapping up this time of year. But yeah, definitely an interesting move by Amazon, and it'll be interesting to see if Walmart, if I were them, I would try to incentivize another play for folks to try to join their ecosystem. But definitely kind of a power struggle going on between the two. And I think this is kind of in response to that. Could also just be building off of those settlements and lawsuits that we were talking about over the summer. They obviously have a little bit more liability on FBA, and with them knowing that, they're kind of playing that card here. But yeah, definitely an interesting adjustment that'll affect the day-to-day quite a bit.
Yeah, and it will change a lot of the products you carry, right? I've talked before, when I did wholesale, I carried these little gnome figurines. They notoriously broke, about 10% would just break in transit. And luckily I had a relationship with the brand. So if anything broke when it got to me, I would get made whole at the cost. That's great. No losses, right? But if they broke at FBA, I would just get reimbursed for that. And there was really no risk. It was like getting a sale. So you didn't really care. That's obviously going to change in March. So I think if you have anything that is easily breakable, and I don't think a lot of sellers sell easily breakable things just because it's a pain anyways, but some will. Some brands will certainly have this as well. It's just something to keep in mind. And I'm really curious to see how the reimbursement services will shift with this. Either they're going to have to pivot in some way, shape, or form, or you're going to see a massive decrease in revenue for these services. I think you'll still use reimbursement services, but if they're taking 10% of whatever they get back as a reimbursement, and that goes down 70%, now they're making far less for the same amount of effort. Their margin basically goes down dramatically. I don't know how that works. So we could see this year, post March, something having to change in the reimbursements industry. I don't know what that is because I'm not inside of it, but this is a massive, massive thing. And so again, I joke with sellers when I talk to them about, all the problems you deal with, developers deal with similar problems, right? Like things can change at a moment's notice, and all of a sudden you're like, cool, the whole business model needs to shift now. So you got to be deep in the weeds as a developer. You have to be, you can't be hands off in this industry, is my point. Whether you're an Amazon seller or on the software side. So I wanted to bring this up, highlight it for everyone, because I think it's a very important one. Like I said, a lot of changes are occurring right now. Nothing too crazy, but I feel like this is the one that is far more impactful from what I've been watching and paying attention to. Again, the product title thing, I think it's a good thing in the long run. It's just going to clean up the marketplace for end consumers, which will, I think, help sellers. But that doesn't really hit or hinder resellers that much. It's definitely going to hurt brands possibly, but I'm not terribly worried about that. As a different competitive landscape anyways. But yeah, those are some of the major ones, obviously fees not getting increased. That sounded nice immediately, but then we have this thing, and this is what I've been saying, right? It's like, I think there's a lot of changes that in the long term, like later this year, will look good in hindsight, but it's the transition to that possible positive end state that I think is going to be kind of cumbersome. So now's the time to really be paying attention to these things. When I was a seller, policy changes didn't happen that frequently. When they did, it rarely, hit me hard. So I just kind of like, whatever. You can't do that anymore. I think you really need to be paying attention. I think Chris Grant, because we're jamming on like ChatGPT's new scheduled task kind of concept. I was like, yeah, I don't really see the value. And he was playing around with it. I saw he posted on Twitter. But one thing you could do is basically just say, hey, once a day, check the internet for policy changes on Amazon, and then let me know if anything changed. That way you're not getting blindsided. You're seeing it, at least within 24 hours. If you're not already seeing it online, right? I mean, that's the cool thing about this being so community driven. You'll know about this if you're on socials relatively fast. But where I think a lot of sellers in the community doesn't go down deep enough is, okay, based on this news, what needs to change? What's the right path forward here? I think a lot of people start to freak out and go, oh no, it's the end. We do this every single time there's any kind of small or large change, and we're all still here. But you really need to, again, take a step back and say, okay, well, what does that change for me? How would that impact me specifically? Because if you're getting, 10, 20% of your inventory reimbursed back to you at retail, and that's going to change, you need to factor that in, because now that revenue's gone. Now, good news is in theory, if you're giving your manufactured costs, you're still getting made whole. So you didn't lose anything, but that capital gave you a 0% return, which is not ideal. So, a 0% return is horrible compared to a non-zero rate of return. So, it's one of those things where like it will impact you. It's not going to ruin businesses outside of potentially massively disrupting the reimbursements world. And I have no idea how because, again, I go to the AI. I'm like, why can't we just build like a bunch of AI agents that can basically do what all these VAs are doing, but for like dirt cheap? Come to find out after talking to a bunch of reimbursement services, they're like, it's really against TLS. Like you're not allowed to do that. It's like a really frowned upon. I was like, okay, so the risk is too high to go that route. If you get found out, which you probably will. So what alternatives do they have if their margins go down dramatically? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's tough to predict. I mean, I think when big changes like this happen, change is always scary, and the reactions tend to be from mild to extreme, and the actual impact typically lies somewhere in between those two ends of the scale.
Right.
It's tough to determine what that actually is going to look like right now without having a lot of direct experience in the reimbursement space. I think kind of an assumption would be if they're making less for the same amount of work, they're going to increase their own charges and fees for what it costs for them to do that work for you. So that trickle down effect would in turn obviously impact sellers and what those costs look like to take advantage of those services and utilize those services. So, but yeah, outside of that's a little bit out of the realm of like my consistent experience and exposure in terms of areas where I typically spend my time. But, if the pie's getting smaller, everyone's going to want a bigger piece, and that means you might just get a little bit smaller one when all's said and done and the dust settles there.
Yeah, it could be that fees have to go up for reimbursement services to make enough to sustain themselves. So you might have to go from 10 to 20% for it to actually make sense. In which case, because you're paying for them to do that, you are now losing money, right? So like, if we're taking the service out of the equation, you paid $30, Amazon gave you $30. You could have sold it for 60, but you didn't get that. You didn't lose anything. But if you're having to pay 10, 20% of that to get it back, you did lose money. So yeah, man, it's going to be an interesting 2025. It's funny because these are the kind of things that I think a lot of sellers will see and immediately jump to, I'm just going to go to Walmart. You're still going to have problems. After having so many public discussions about this, I have realized that a lot of the big name people view what I'm saying and agree with it. Like we're viewing it in the same light. And it's funny because a lot of people haven't been talking too much about this whole grass is not necessarily greener on the other side. That doesn't mean you shouldn't also be there. Right. So it's less about jumping over the fence to a new pasture and more so, can you break the fence down and sell them both basically? And a lot of sellers are already starting to see, okay, there's a lot of positives to Walmart, but it's got its own issues. And here's some things like, the BSR is a great example. When you have something that somebody is so behaviorally familiar with in terms of how it operates, and it's called the same thing, right? BSR on Amazon, how it works. Then you go over to Walmart and you go, oh, they have a BSR. It probably works the exact same way. And it doesn't. A lot of sellers get trumped up there. So they start making mistakes because they have these assumptions, these preconceived notions that it's basically just one and the same. And it's just not. That BSR on Walmart is factoring in sales velocity in store as well. So just because it's a 500 in whatever category doesn't mean the same thing as a 500 in the same category on Amazon. And obviously the demand itself is different, but so there's a lot of blind spots that I think will get fleshed out over time and smoothed out. But in the interim, you have to be aware of these things. You have to understand those differences. But again, it feels like the theme so far, granted, we're almost about to close out month 1. It's already felt like 3 months. Feels like the details matter. That is, I think, ultimately what I'm seeing so far. And this goes in alignment with what I was saying. I think the theme for sellers going into 2025 is adaptability. I think you need to be able to zig and zag relatively fast. You need to be able to pivot here and there, small, large ways. And the flip side of what is causing that is basically all the details are kind of shifting around a little bit. And that's okay. They always do, but they're shifting around in a different way, in a more unexpected way, right? When fees go up every year, you can be mad about it, but you kind of know it's coming. Like there's no surprise outside of this year when they said they weren't going to do that. So I think now you can't really rest on your laurels and your experience in terms of what will change and how it will change. I think you need to take first principles approach here and say, well, let's just see what changes and react to that and make sure that the business is flexible enough to react to those things. So this goes hand in hand with what we've always preached, which is like have that emergency cash fund for the business, for your personal life, whatever, so that if it takes you 3 months to sort out whatever craziness can occur, great. It's probably not going to take you 3 months. It's probably going to take you, 2-3 weeks, but knowing you have that stability means that you don't have to shut down the business. You don't have to overreact. You can just say, okay, well, let me see what this is, sit with it, figure out what makes the most sense, talk to a few people. I don't have to rush. I could take, a few days if I need to, and then make the right decision to move forward. So I think that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully a lot of this will relax throughout the year. I don't know if they're front loading or if, what happens, but there's just a lot of changes that are occurring right now.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the word blind spot is the perfect way to describe it. I think right now on the Walmart side of things, there's a lot of blind spots, even for Walmart themselves. They don't really know operationally where they're going to have to make adjustments. Obviously, everyone's talking about, man, there's way less fees on Walmart. This is great. I would almost be willing to bet a hefty amount that will not always be the case. They'll figure out where they can implement some sort of fee structure to have just another revenue stream. But I think this just really emphasizes, especially with the change on like inventory, FBA reimbursements, just making intelligent buys. That's always the best thing you can do for your business. If there's, like your example, Dylan, like miniature gnomes that break frequently and they're going to be worried about those reimbursements or recouping that inventory. Maybe that's an item you no longer try to restock as heavily. So a lot of things to take into account, and the landscape will continue to shift and fluctuate over the next year, probably until Walmart gets a little bit more settled and established. So being nimble and flexible, making sure you're up to date on any, in this case, policy changes, just best practices in both ecosystems. That's always just going to set you up for the best success, and also kind of provide some insurance as well as somewhat of a safety net there. Yeah.
Kind of switching gears, we made some changes to our onboarding. We try to make it more structured in app. And so we've been watching this over the past week or so. And it's been nice to see people have I'm going to call it like a clearer direction when you first land into Aura for the first time. We had some kind of nudges of like, hey, go connect your marketplace, do this. Now it's pure in-app, perfectly designed. So it's like, it walks you step by step. And I think for what we do, because it is very complex in a lot of cases, our challenge is how do we simplify those things down without removing the added performance? And, what the team's been working on with onboarding has really streamlined that quite a lot. Like, it's very clear, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, you're up and you're actually repricing by the time you're done there, which is really cool. But at the same time, being able to say, hey, like, I already know how to do this, get out of my way, exit, great. Like, go do your thing. So that's been kind of fun. So that's a release we made, what was it, early last week, just allowing users, especially newer sellers. I think this is really helpful for the newer seller who hears about repricing, hears about Aura, jumps in and goes, great, what now? And now it's like, great, this, then you worry about that, then that. And so we've taken all of our experience from personally onboarding people, helping via chat and all that stuff, and said, okay, let's combine this into a better structured onboarding process that speeds up the time it takes you to go from, like, you just created your account, there's nothing there, to like you're actually repricing and you get it now. So that's been pretty fun. So that's one release we made. Working on a lot of cool stuff right now that we can't fully talk about because some stuff's in stealth mode, but I can say Walmart is a major focus right now for us, which is a massive deal, right? I think it's going to be super fun. First time for us where we get to go into a brand new marketplace and learn those dynamics. A lot of what's happening right now with the repricing Walmart world is not really using first principles. It's like, just match my price on Amazon, but that you could get higher prices on Walmart. So like, why would you do that? You know what I mean? Like, you're kind of negating one of the pros of selling on Walmart. In the way Walmart works from like a buy box perspective is so vastly different than on Amazon. And so you really have to take your time to understand the data. What do they include? What do they not include? And be able to parse through all that to create best practices, strategies, like what even is a strategy for Walmart? Like, so this is what we're working on right now. It's really fun, like getting really into the weeds on it.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting to kind of have so many things going on. And like you said, we can't quite shed too much light into what those things are, but yeah, I think it'll be an interesting, learning curve for us as well to figure out where those best practices differ. Obviously, we know there are going to be differences between the platforms and how to treat listings differently depending on age of inventory. Obviously, that's a big thing in Amazon with their fee structures. That's why we prioritize the age of inventory workflow release and things of that nature. But kind of going back to the onboarding flow, the quickest way to assess a platform is to assess if it's working well. And for us, that's just making sure you guys get repricing as quickly as possible without being set up incorrectly or not set up for the best results. So that's what the real goal of that onboarding overhaul looked like. And we have seen those numbers kind of bring down in terms of the time it takes for folks to get repricing. But if you do know what you're doing and you don't need that walkthrough, it is exitable, for lack of a better word. And you do also, regardless of where you lie in terms of comfortability within the platform, you do still have that option to schedule time with us. Make sure that you are fully grasping any areas where you want to make sure you're up to speed and using things properly. So definitely don't hesitate to schedule that onboarding call with Finn or reach out to us. We can send out that calendar link to make sure you're squared away and are up and running. But yeah, it'll definitely be kind of fun to see the Walmart space evolve, how that plugs in with our current offerings and where those differences are going to be for sure.
Yeah. And there's a few things like we can't do yet, like hyperdrive, is that even possible on Walmart? And so I think what's going to be fun once we get all the foundations laid out is figuring out the unique usages of it. And, that's what we did with Amazon's API, right? Like, we found a way to build and create hyperdrive and nobody's yet to replicate it, which is awesome. But we're like, what exists on Walmart that we could do that's interesting? What even makes sense, right? Because again, the dynamics are so different that, the things that work perfectly on Amazon, even if we could do it on Walmart, may actually not have the same positive effects. And so that's the crazy part, right? Like diving into the data, running a bunch of experiments and just seeing, when we first got into the repricer space for Amazon, the industry had been around for at least half a decade, if not a decade, by the time we jumped in. And so there was already a lot of understanding as to what worked, what didn't work. So you kind of have that foundational understanding of everything. And with this, because it's so new, there's a lot of talk about like what works and what doesn't work, but nobody has like a ton of confidence in it. It's kind of like, this is what I'm seeing, but I'm not fully sure yet, you know? So yeah, it's gonna be super, super interesting to see how it plays out. I'm really excited for it. I think it's gonna be a fun thing to launch and build out. But yeah, it's gonna be, again, an interesting, I keep saying this, but I think it's still true. It's like, it's gonna be an interesting 2025 for a number of reasons.
Yeah, and it's hard to feel comfortable when you are not sure if you're standing on steady ground, especially in a new space like the Walmart space. And I think this may sound not negative, but I can't find the right word. But I think there's a little bit of comfort knowing that you're most definitely not standing on solid ground. So expect the unexpected. Things will change, and it's just about being ready to kind of adjust and be flexible with whatever those changes may look like as they come.
Yeah, 1000%. See Prince here. Hey guys, love the new age of inventory filter. Awesome to hear that. Any idea when you/Amazon starts the clock on when the item starts aging? Like from the time you list? Oh, okay. So great question. So the way it works, Amazon basically tells us how many units are in any given age bucket. So there is no like, this unit is 13 days old. We don't know that. We only know that there's 10 units in 0 to 30 days. There's 4 units in 31 to 60 days. That's all we get to see. So what we do in the way the age of inventory works is we're looking at those specific buckets. So it gives you an idea as like, okay, well, if I want to liquidate greater than 90 days, then I'll choose those buckets. So 90 plus, and then therefore the moment it crosses over, that's fine. So it's funny because you know, when you say I have 10 units in 0 to 30 day age bucket, you could have sent in 3 separate batches across 3 separate weeks. Can't see it, right? We don't know that it's equally split basically. So the average could actually be 15 days. No idea of knowing that. So we only know the total amount in each bucket. So that's kind of our limitation. That's what we work within. That's what we personally use. So we don't use when it was created or anything like that, because the way that works is basically we're seeing when a listing was created or when a SKU was created, not the inventory itself. So we, you know, that's kind of the route we take. That seems to make the most sense. That's flexible enough as well. But Casey, anything if you want to add on to that?
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dylan. I believe Amazon starts their clock once it is checked in. Obviously, those different shipments you are correct, where everything does fall into those specific buckets. And just kind of building off of that, Prince, because of that, in terms of best practices for the age of inventory workflow, with those buckets being 30 days wide, essentially, and you having multiple shipments and things of that nature, we do recommend using the by units trigger as opposed to percentage of inventory trigger, just because you could have a shipment that's 2 days old. You could have a shipment that's 28 days old. You want to start being a little bit more aggressive when those 28-day-old units enter that next bucket. So in terms of best practices there, you'll want to do when more than 0 units enter whatever specific age range, so that when 1 unit enters that age range, or it can make those adjustments. If you do percentage of inventory, you could run into having a larger shipment that's new, a smaller shipment that's older, and holding on to a perhaps maybe not the best strategy as that inventory begins to age there.
I'm gonna bring this up for us because I think it's helpful.
Yeah,
our team's pretty great at creating support documentation to break down how things work. And because one, I want you to understand how whatever it is we're talking about works, but 2, what are the best practices here? We try to build things that are flexible. So yeah, you can use percentages, you can use units. I kind of prefer units for some reason. That's just the way my brain works. But in talking with some larger sellers, they like percentages. So the way this essentially works is you set the schedule of whenever this is going to occur, this workflow. You could have it every hour, every 3 hours, once a day, once a week, totally up to you. I would recommend doing this more frequently than less frequently, because a lot of sellers, when we talk to them, like, how often are you doing this manually, like changing your strategies around? They're like, well, I'll log in like once a week to do it. Okay. So I would not go longer than once a week. But I think going shorter than once a week is probably a good idea. I think at least once a day is probably a good thing. And then like we were talking about, you can do that percentage, you can do units. And the way this basically works is you're choosing the buckets to look at. So we're basically saying, okay, in this case, if there's more than 0 units, so 1 or more, in any of these buckets, we're going to do something. So in this case, this example, we're saying if more than 1 or more than 0 units, so 1 or more, is older than 30 days, so 31 forward, what we want to do is assign this strategy when that is true. So that's how we have this built out. The good thing about this is if you have it built out so that, let's say you have 3 of these buckets, if you will, and I'm not really talking about age of inventory buckets at this point, but let's just say you have those 3 strategies, right? So let's go take a look at the core strategies that we typically recommend. So we start with Maven. We call this level 1. When you first come into stock, you want to be kind of conservative. And as time goes on, you want to become more aggressive, eventually go into liquidation. So when a listing first comes into stock, we're going to start with Maven, level 1. As time goes on, we go to buy box targeting, which is a rule-based strategy, which is level 2. And then as more time goes on, we go to level 3, which is liquidation. The way a lot of sellers do this is they have these buckets in their head. They basically say, well, if I've had it for 30 days or more than 30 days, I kind of want to become more aggressive. So what they would do is they would basically say, okay, if it's, greater than, or I'm sorry, if it's in 0 to 30, assign Maven, which is level 1. If it's 31 to 60, assign strategy 2. And if it's greater than 60, maybe they want to liquidate. So if they've held inventory for more than 2 months, they want to start to liquidate it. And so what's nice about this is you can build these workflows to basically manage that whole thing for you. And by using these buckets, it allows you to be very clear as to when you become aggressive and when you become less aggressive. This is so important. It's not just about becoming more aggressive. That's only one side of the same coin. We know that you could be shipping in things at different times, right? I shipped in something 3 weeks ago. I just did another shipment that got checked in today. So let's say, 3 months ago, that inventory, I do want to liquidate. But the moment it's gone, my new stuff is less than 30 days. So I actually don't want to be that aggressive. I want to go back to Maven now. And so by building out the workflows using the best practices that we recommend, it's able to do that for you automatically. This is why I like doing it at least once a day. Things happen rapidly, and you don't want to find yourself in a position where a lot of sellers do when we talk to them about doing this manually. They say, well, I know there's some stuff I should be liquidating, but I just don't want to deal with it. That's an emotional, mental friction blocker, right? So, well, if you removed yourself from that and you said, well, this is my process, you do it for me, you don't wait 3 or 4 weeks to do something you should have already done. And that's going, more aggressive. That's not the end of the world. But what happens when you forgot to look at your account for a week or 2 and something new got checked in and actually should have been brought back? Now it's still set to liquidate. So you're liquidating brand new inventory that you didn't need to. And so you really want to be able to go forward and backwards in terms of how conservative or how aggressive your strategy is going to be.
Yeah, and I did just post in the chat there, and I do have the article set up. We have a separate article as well for the Age of Inventory 4 best practices with an actual video in there that will show you those 3 phases there. Obviously, starting with Maven, level 2 buy box, level 3 liquidation. So the previous article that we were sharing was more so for one function, but the auto set strategies based on inventory age will be the more comprehensive and way we recommend it, kind of going top to bottom. Like Dylan said, with workflows working top to bottom, it'll just help reset that newer inventory back to Maven as opposed to keeping it on the more aggressive strategies. So yeah, if you do scroll, I think all the way to the bottom, there should be a screenshot with that fully built there.
Yeah. So these are those 3 that we were talking about, right? So basically if the age of inventory is less than, and what we're basically doing is looking at the oldest age of inventory bucket for any SKU, right? So if the oldest inventory is less than 30 days, put it on Maven. If the oldest is between 31 and 60, assign strategy 2 target buy box targeting strategy. If it's greater than that, then just assign the liquidation strategy. And so what we're doing is we're linearly going through this. So if I have a again, a listing that's on liquidation and I sold that last unit, and now the next highest age of inventory bucket is 30 days, so less than 30 days, the workflow Aura is actually going to assign Maven. So again, this is what's so impactful about this. It's not, I think a lot of sellers really just think about like, well, I want to become more aggressive over time. Sure. But our lives are not that simplistic. Most of the time you're restocking, especially if you're doing things like wholesale and things of that nature. So you want to understand the life cycle that we always preach about, right? Every seller, including yourself, is in a different phase of the same life cycle. When you first come into stock, you're very conservative with your price. As time goes on, you become more aggressive and eventually need to liquidate, if not lose money, just to get your capital back because it was a bad buying decision or what have you. But there are a lot of times when you need to come back down this path. So it's not just going forward, it's also sometimes going backwards. So this age of inventory workflow essentially allows you to dictate how you do it, and it does it for you. So if you don't liquidate until 90 days plus, great, set that up. If you liquidate after 3 weeks, great, set that up, right? Totally up to you. So this article, which Casey put into the comments here, is the one I'm showing you guys right now. So this walks you through not only how to set it up, but how to set it up using best practices, kind of how to think about it. But again, it's less about this is the exact way you should do it. It's more so this is a foundational understanding of like, here's where you start and you tweak it to match how you do it. Some sellers liquidate far earlier than others. Nobody's right or wrong. You dictate that, you know, right? When people are saying, hey, work on the business, not in the business. I think this is a similar concept. You know, work on your repricer, not inside of your repricer. You should be telling your repricing tool, here's what I tend to do manually, when I tend to do it. You do that for me. I have other more important things to do, like sourcing more profitable inventory. So workflows allows you to take that to the next step.
Yeah. And we always do recommend best practices just based on what we typically see. With that being said, if your business is not typical, do what's best for you. If you typically don't replenish inventory, then resetting back to that starting strategy, not quite as important for you. But yeah, always feel free to reach out to us as well, being like, hey, I have a little bit of a different setup. This is how I typically operate on my inventory. What do you guys think? We're always happy to jump into your account, do any strategy double checking, workflow double checking, anything of that nature. So yeah, definitely don't hesitate to reach out there. And then just one other piece on the age of inventory specifically, since we gather that data directly from Amazon, we're only able to do that for FBA listings. Amazon doesn't provide age of inventory data for FBM, since there is obviously a different setup in that area. So the FBM management of strategies and becoming more aggressive over time will still be a manual process right now, but this will help handle all of your FBA inventory based on that age data that we receive from Amazon there.
Yeah. And one thing to highlight, you know, when I do these live calls, podcasts, recordings, you know, whatever, I always talk about sellers struggle with two specific things: speed and complexity. What's interesting is the way I've been positioning that conversation is Maven handles complexity. So our AI strategy handles the complexity for you. Hyperdrive is what speeds things up. But if you take a step back and we're just talking age of inventory workflows, things of that nature, it's also handling both in a different kind of way, right? You're able to do this switching once an hour, which you previously did not have the capacity or time to do, instead of doing it once a week. So there's your speed into the complexity. A lot of sellers are going listing by listing and saying, well, what do I want to do here? Well, now you're recreating the wheel and the process that you basically follow the same way anyways. And so you run into certain situations where you didn't follow your process and you made the wrong decision. Why? Because you're a human. We do this. Software is much better at not breaking routine because it's going to do explicitly what you tell it to do for the most part. And so it's able to handle the last little bit of complexity, which is how do you want to reprice and when? So if you pair that with assigning a new listing, the strategy, all that good stuff, you're basically automating 90% of your repricing software. And I think that's an incredible thing, because using a repricing software it tends to be very complicated because you have to create your own strategies, not really fully understanding what you're doing. You have to manage every single one of your listings. That time commitment is massive. So yes, any repricing tool that is updating your pricing, at some level of frequency is better than not. But what a lot of sellers don't realize when they're going to use other software that doesn't have these kind of features, they're not understanding that they're basically creating a new job for themselves, creating a new set of tasks that they have to do daily, weekly. I don't think that's how it should be. It should be, let me tell you how to get it done. You get it done for me, free up my time and give me better performance and let me get back to the things that matter. That's so incredible. Let's see, Bosley here. We'll definitely reach out to you on this strategy. This is Lil Wayne. Oh, hey, how's it going? Thanks again for the merch. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so Lil Wayne got some shirts from us. Yeah, definitely reach out to support if anybody needs help setting these things up. Let us know. We're super happy to help. One thing we are doing daily is we are checking user accounts that are creating these workflows. Just to make sure there's no obvious issues that we can help fix for you. So if we find that you set it up incorrectly, we will fix it and email you and let you know, hey, here's what we noticed. We corrected it for you. You're all set, just letting you know that we did that. So even if you're like, I just want to do it myself, we're probably still going to check just in case. But it does seem like from when we initially launched this functionality, the error rate is what I'm going to call it, has exponentially gone down. So a lot more support documentation. The video on that support doc that Casey mentioned basically walks you through creating that in real time. So it's going to answer a lot of your questions while you're trying to create that. Some people are more visual than others. That's certainly me. So if I watch a video of somebody doing it, I can probably do it. Reading it, it's going to take me a little bit longer, to be honest. So we have a lot of support on this kind of stuff. So one, we try to make it as simple and straightforward as possible in the product, but also give you support where you need it. But yeah, it's a really impactful feature, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from it so far.
Yeah, just to reiterate, we are double checking those accounts, but if you are setting it up and you want us to check right away, definitely please shoot us a note. We don't always have that data available immediately. So if it is quicker for you to just shoot us a note, definitely do that. We'll jump right in. If we see anything wrong or things we're not sure, or maybe not quite in line with what we think you may be trying to do, we'll probably just pause that workflow just to make sure that, hey, is this how you want this set up? This is how it's going to perform, just to prevent any performance issues just based on whether it's confusion, a slight misunderstanding, anything there. We won't take the liberty of making changes and activating it. We'll probably make the changes, leave it there in draft mode so you folks can pull the final trigger there. But yeah, please reach out to us, whether it's workflow help, strategy help, anything in between. We're more than happy to jump into that account and see what's going on.
Nice. See, Darcy has a good one here. Is there a strategy when an item is suppressed? Casey, can you dive into that?
Yeah. So under the pursuit section of your strategy there, Darcy, for rules-based strategies, if your strategy is targeting the buy box as your competition, the default action will be to use your current price and slowly drop your price by 2 cents every few minutes. That's based on our best practices for slowly dropping that price to try and reactivate that buy box. That setting, I believe, is titled when the buy box is suppressed, or depending on your custom strategy settings, it might say if there's no competition. But that is how Aura will initially react, trying to unsuppress that buy box. 2 cents is what we recommend. You can feel free to increase that margin if you'd like, but just keep in mind that that will lead to that price dropping a little bit more quickly. And then on Maven's side of things, that is also the default action, dropping that price by 2 cents incrementally. If you don't want Maven to unsuppress that buy box, you can go into the advanced settings section there and just uncheck that box. And if you don't want any rules-based strategies to try and unsuppress the buy box, you can change that suppression action to do not reprice, which will just hold you at your current price when the buy box becomes suppressed. But like we said, that's based on our best practices, what we found to work the best. If your business is a little bit different, or you have different goals on that listing other than unsuppressing the buy box, definitely feel free to do what you think is best, or reach out to us and we can give you some advice in that area.
Yeah. See, Tatum, can a system be set up to label different seller stores? For example, if there are multiple Amazon accounts, can we name them accordingly to make it easier to differentiate between them? Great question. So right now, if you go to the listings, you can add a filter by marketplace. And then that will give you all the marketplace IDs in that account. We are working to return the storefront names, so it's a little friendlier. So you won't actually have to be able to go in and label those. You'll be able to basically see them. But right now you can actually go in and filter on the marketplace ID. So if you know what that is, you'll be able to do that pretty fast.
And I believe the marketplace ID is still shown on your marketplace's tab.
Yes.
So if you're not sure what that is, you can check there first, find that ID, and then filter by that accordingly.
Exactly. But we are working to add the actual your storefront names. So we are actually doing that too, which will make it definitely easier. See, only been an Amazon seller for about a month now. First few FBA shipments are being logged in now. Some listings are active but not Prime eligible yet. Do the pricing strategies change in this case? Let's see. They can. They're active but not Prime eligible yet. So do you mean, Floyd, that you don't have basically you don't have your Prime badge yet is what's occurring? So that either puts you at, you should still be FBA in Prime though. But basically that shouldn't change anything. And especially if that is something that will be corrected for you in the very, very near future. Oh, they are in reserve. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, so that clarifies. Okay, so basically they're active, but they're reserved. That you really don't need to do much for repricing when they're in a reserved state. There's really not much you can do with those anyways. So yeah, they're not in their final placement. So what I would recommend in this case, you're kind of in this pending situation where your inventory will change status. They will truly become active, in which case you want repricing to be active the moment that change is true. That could happen at 3 o'clock in the morning for all we know. I would still set up the strategy you want, enable repricing, have your costs, have your mins in there, so that when it does flip the switch and truly become active, it's off to the races, or we'll know the moment that it happens. The thing I like to tell sellers is you want things set up before it goes live, because you don't know when it's going to go live. It could be at 8 p.m., could be at 1 p.m., you could be taking a shower, whatever, right? And instead of relying on you, the human, the seller, to jump in, check, and then make changes, those changes already happen with you. You're basically queuing them up so that whenever the active state does become true, it's able to do everything it needs to do. So I would still set everything up as if they were active, so that when that does occur, you're in a better position.
Yeah, the default action there, Floyd, is for any listings that don't currently have fulfillable units, or is going to treat that as out of stock.
Yeah.
Reason for that being is that the Amazon algorithm for determining the buy box winner takes into account your seller rating, your price, and the shipping time. So by pricing you to your max, or by treating you as out of stock until that becomes fulfillable, we are able to kind of maximize your inventory in the buy box. So kind of lead to the best results there. So the default action is to set you to your max price at that time. That way, if someone's desperate and needs the item right away, they can still buy at a higher price, but leads to some more kind of effective pricing once it does become live there. And that shouldn't change anything from a strategy standpoint. If you're not eligible to win the buy box yet, you can still target the buy box as your primary competition. You just won't be rotated into the buy box there.
Yeah. Let's see, Angel. Can we use the inventory age strategy to trigger specific workflows or strategies for certain ASINs only? For instance, I have some products that I'd like to trigger my custom liquidation strategy for. So yes, this is why we wanted workflows, the feature, to be modular in this way. So what you can do is you can actually go in, add a filter, and say, well, if the ASIN is whatever you include in the text field, or the SKU, you can use the SKU as well. If the SKU has this in it, or is this SKU, then I want you to do that and still check age of inventory, right? So you might say filter block is the SKU. Second filter block beneath that one is age of inventory. And if that's still true, so basically it's that SKU and it's over, let's say 60 days for our example, then go to my liquidation. What I would recommend, because now we're talking about, filters need to be, or the actions within a filter needs to be nested. So it needs to be shifted over. Some sellers get stuck with that. I would highly recommend reaching out to support, telling us exactly the SKU or SKUs and what you want to do in plain text. Let us help you set that up, because we're going to make sure that it's set up correctly for you. Because that one can be a little complicated, definitely doable, not a problem. We just want to make sure that it's set up properly. But yeah, we could definitely do that.
Yeah, and right now, Angel, that filter block would have to be on a SKU basis. I don't believe we support ASIN filtering right now, just because Aura does operate on a SKU basis. And right now, a filter block can only filter by one specific SKU or by a common phrase that is in those SKUs. So what I would recommend, we are working on supporting kind of comma separation between multiple SKUs within one filter block. But until we provide that, I would recommend implementing at least a common phrase or term or few characters within those SKUs so you can filter by that common phrase and then have that action take place. But yeah, Finn is in the support chat right now. So definitely feel free to jump in, ask for some help there. And he'll be happy to jump in. I'll be back on chat in about 15 minutes as well. So we can help get you sorted there.
Nice. See, perfect. Thank you for the response on a plane. Connection isn't the best. I don't think we've ever had anybody watch office hours on a plane. So Floyd, that's pretty awesome. You're first that I'm aware of. Let's see. Okay. So Tatum, can we schedule a meeting with someone from Aura? I want to make sure we're using the platform to its full potential, adjust some of my strategies, and explore any additional Aura has to offer. So yes. So every user can schedule a personalized onboarding sessions, roughly 20, 25 minutes. We're live in your account via Zoom. We can definitely do that. So reach out to chat, that live chat in the bottom right. You're going to see a blue dot. Click that. Just reach out and say, hey, I'd love to schedule an onboarding session. We'll send you a link. Get you scheduled as soon as we can. But yeah, super happy to do that. And that's exactly what we're going to do is just check everything, make sure it's all set up correctly, help you optimize anything, and explain anything that's not super clear yet. See, Angel, SKU Works just wanted to be able to group SKUs for certain strategies based on age. Yeah. So what's cool is, and Casey already kind of mentioned this, but the way the SKU filter works is you can put in an entire SKU. So it's only going to do that one or a common thing inside that SKU. So as an example, if you encode things in your SKU, so like if you put where you purchase your inventory, and let's say you purchase some stuff from Walmart, and if Walmart is in the SKU, you could say, well, everything that includes Walmart in the SKU, do this to that. So that allows it to basically be a little bit more flexible and all encompassing as well. But yeah, we'll be adding that comma separation so you can really get in the nitty gritty if you want to. Awesome. Perfect. Yeah. And listen, if you have not scheduled an onboarding session, you most certainly should. It's free. I don't care how much you're paying. We don't care if you're in a trial that you started today. You should absolutely do a personal onboarding session. So we got a few more minutes left over here. So any last minute questions before we start to wrap up? We're happy to dive deep into any kind of topics.
Yeah, and as a reminder, folks, we always do like to kick things off with kind of a common theme or something that may be applicable to everybody. Obviously, today that was the FBA reimbursement workaround rework that Amazon released. But if you do ever have like topics, things you want us to cover, whether it's Aura specific, seller specific, best business practices specific outside of being a third-party seller, definitely shoot a note, whether it's in the comments, come to us in chat, say, hey, would love if you guys took a few minutes to talk about this. It's been really top of mind. We're always open to those suggestions, and we do like to have some sort of structure at the initial start of these. So never hesitate to help give us that direction in terms of what's going to be most impactful for you.
Yeah. And we call it open office hours because there is no format. It's just us creating an hour a week to just sit down with everyone, answer any questions you have, go down any rabbit holes you want to go down. But yeah, we like to kind of start it off with something. Especially when it comes to Amazon, there's always something to kind of get started with. Let's see. Bosley, is the quarter in review staying through Q1, Q3? So it is not. So I think there's a few more days left before that will be removed. If you want to basically save your dashboard, you can save an image version of that just to have it for posterity. That is predominantly going to be for Q4 only. So that will come back in October of this year. So that will be removed soon. See, Floyd, hyperdrive limits, will that be expanded to more items in the future? So I can't talk about this quite a bit yet. We are looking at things in this area is what I will say. 50 has been a technical limit from the start, and we are looking for ways of expanding that technical limit. as much as we can. So I think we have some good stuff in store for you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Initially, restrictions were kind of in place due to how Amazon had structured their API. We have looked into that internally and are looking at ways to potentially increase those, but nothing solid yet. So right now, I would definitely adhere to the limits that are listed on the pricing page there.
Yeah. See, okay, got ya. The Q4 in review was an awesome feature and made competition out of it. Yeah, that was what we wanted, right? We wanted something to say, well, everybody's kind of doing this anyways. Let's just make it really well designed, highlight the important stuff that people want to talk about, highlight how did you do on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Prime Day, stuff like that. And also give you some gamification, right? Like what percentage are you for Aura users, right? Are you ranked number one? Like now there's a rankings thing. So we're going to take a lot of what we learned in the positive feedback we got from last Q4 into this Q4 in 2025. So you will see that come back. It may change a little bit. We learned a lot, but it was nice to see a lot of the positive feedback on that. So it's definitely not going away entirely. It's just that will not be present during Q1 to Q3. Awesome. So we got about 5 minutes here. Any last minute questions? Anything we could dive deep into with the time that we have remaining? We'll have to circle back post March 10th and see how this reimbursement policy change is affecting everyone. I'm sure it'll be very obvious very soon. A lot of people already talking about it, but I think the biggest thing that I'm curious about is how it's going to affect the reimbursement services industry. That I think is going to be very interesting to watch. Hopefully they can pivot around and make it work, but we could see that the reimbursement service industry goes away, changes. I don't know. Everything's on the table right now with this kind of a policy change, but we'll see. It looks like they're also making it slightly easier to submit reimbursement requests. So you might be able to do a little bit more of this yourself, but we very well could see that people rely less on services to do this and more on part-time VAs that will jump in once a week, process everything just for you, and the cost makes more sense from that perspective. Whether that's a voluntary change, like that's just culturally what happens because that it makes sense, or because the services industry can't really sustain their margins anymore, and you kind of have to do that. So it could be that you pay more. Maybe not. We'll have to see. But yeah. I am curious how people are going to feel giving their manufacturer cost. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, once these changes come into place, we'd love to hear from anyone that this immediately affects or how this affects you. We always like to kind of keep a pulse on specifically our customer base, but the space overall. So if you do start to go through these processes or starting to notice any trends, patterns, or things that work better compared to others, definitely let us know so we can kind of keep the community informed. Always want to make sure that if there is a better way to do things, that more people know about it, just to make things as easy as possible for everyone. And we'd just be curious to hear how that initially is going and taking place for you all as well.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're going to wrap it up here for time. Appreciate everybody making the time, especially, Floyd on a plane. Appreciate that. Good way to spend a flight. We do this every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST, open office hours. There's no format. We come in with maybe some news, some updates, feature releases, things of that nature, but it's really designed to answer any questions that you may have. But please don't wait to ask us questions. If it's especially about Aura, jump into live chat, ask Casey, ask Finn. Let's get you set up with an onboarding if you haven't already done that. And if you're intrigued by this age of inventory workflow stuff, also ask us for help with that. There's plenty of support documentation, but we are super happy to jump into your account, help you get that set up correctly, and offload a lot of the administration work that repricing tools tend to have. So with that, we'll let you get back to the rest of your week, and we will see you guys next Wednesday. Enjoy it.
Have a good week, folks.